I have always been here.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, geeks and nerds and ambassadors everywhere, and welcome back to my home and your home, the Ambassadorial Wing. And hope y'all are having a good Saturday night. Hope it's been a good weekend for you all, and very glad to be back with you all once again as we kick off another live stream here on the Ambassadorial Wing and another installment in my retro review series. And tonight, as I promised a few weeks ago, we're getting back into the pop culture of the 1980s. And this evening, we're going to be talking about a favorite topic of mine, obviously, the 1980s and pop culture of those years, but in particular, gaming of those years. We're going to be talking about the major consoles, we're going to be talking about the big games, and we're going to be talking about the impact that retro gaming has had on pop culture and on the gaming landscape since its introduction in the 80s. So, this will be an open panel discussion. I will be dropping the link here in a few minutes or anything so that anybody that wants to join me for this discussion tonight can do so. But just a few pieces of business before we do get started. If this is your first visit to the Ambassadorial Wing, I hope you enjoy the stream tonight, and I hope that you come across this on the replay. I hope you also enjoy the stream. On a more personal note, and I'm not trying to make this I'm not trying to put a damper on this evening's festivities by any means, but I do want to apologize for the delay in my start tonight. We got some very somber news earlier today in terms of the ambassadorial family. Found out that my mom's brother, my uncle, has sadly passed on. And I will be candid with you all. I did consider postponing the stream, but considering the fact that it was my uncle who got me into video gaming in the first place, I felt that it was only appropriate to go ahead and do this stream tonight in his memory, and also to do my best to bring you all the content that you enjoy and keep my word to you all. So, that being said, like I said, I do not want to put a damper on this evening's festivities by any means. So, but like I said, I wanted to at least give some explanation as to why I changed the start time for the stream this evening. So, anyway, that being said, let's say hello to the chat before we get things going here. And to my good friends, Ace Mowick, Fook Norris, Classic Comics. It has been a while, my friend. Good to see you. And Ace, thank you, my friend. I do appreciate it. So, as I said, it's going to be a little bit of a tough road for everybody across the board, but we will get through it. We will pass this. This too will pass, and we will make it. So I do appreciate y'all's comments and your concern. So anyway, just to give my thoughts briefly before I open up the stream for those that want to join me this evening, my initial thoughts on gaming of the 1980s. As a kid of the 90s, I have all, like I said, it was my uncle who got me into video gaming in the first place. It was actually my uncle who gave me my very first gaming console, and it was actually an Atari. When he was with his second wife, my aunt, now ex aunt, unfortunately, one Christmas decided to put a little bit of a cherry on top and everything for my Christmas, and they wrapped up their Atari and a bunch of games that came along with it. And back in those days, you could go to secondhand movie stores and so on, and you could find the old Atari cartridges. You know the brick, the very simple little black brick and everything that had the label of the game on the front of it. So, and that was honestly my introduction to video gaming. And you had to get the little switch that went on the side of your TV and hooked into the back into all the wiring and everything. It wasn't as simple as it is nowadays, where you just hook up a couple of cords and poof, you're done. You had to work to play your video games. But I will tell you, I was a 8-bit warrior, because back in those days, that's all we had was 8 bits. Nothing more, nothing less. So, and I had many sore thumbs, many long nights just sitting there blasting away at the Atari version of Empire Strikes Back, or as some people called it, the camels versus the penguins. That's what it was called. So, and that's just one little initial experience and everything. But like I said, I do not want to keep you all waiting. I'm going to post the link in the chat. So for any of you that want to join me tonight and talk this thing called retro gaming, the link is there. As you all know, use it. So anyway, just bear with me for a minute. And there. And also to the chat, Marcus Cruz. Marcus, it is good to see you. Classic Comics. Yes, it is good to see Classic. Yes. Oh, that's right. I'm on YouTube. I can't do that here. Blow on the cartridge. It helps. Yes, Classic. You're not wrong, because particularly for those of us who owned a Nintendo system back in the day, a simple NES, not the Super NES, just the NES Nintendo Entertainment System, you had to blow on the cartridge. So, and Marcus Cruz, it is good to see you, bud. Appreciate it, and thank you. I very much appreciate that. So, okay, well, Classic, I'll be going for a little while, so whenever you get your lessons done, hop on in here. So, and Marcus, Ambassador, does the 80s have Elden Ring, though? No, it didn't have Elden Ring, but it did have Fantasy Castle, which is sort of like. Yeah, Classic. Well, you didn't have to blow on the cartridge for the Atari. You just had to blow on it for the Nintendo more so than anything. And want to give a very warm welcome to a face I have not seen in here in a while. Number one, formerly known as Number One Sci-Fi. Number one, good to see you, buddy.
How you doing?
I'm doing okay. How you doing? Appreciate you coming up tonight.
No problem.
So, number one, obviously, I don't know if you're necessarily a kid of the 80s, but I imagine you were around in the 80s. So, your thoughts on gaming of the 1980s? What were your experiences? What did you enjoy?
Yeah, mainly had first the Atari 2600 system.
Mm-hmm.
Probably got that either late. I'm trying to think when it came out. Probably late 70s, early 80s. I think is when it came out. And then obviously once the NES original Nintendo Entertainment System came out, then obviously got that. So those were the main two. But I do remember like ColecoVision, or I should say in television.
Yeah.
Well, I think they had ColecoVision actually before the NES too, as well. But
Well, it's funny you should mention when I was looking up images for my thumbnail for this stream and everything, I punched in consoles of the 80s and the ColecoVision did pop up in that search. So you're probably right there. So, and just real quick, number one, before you go any further, want to welcome a regular here on the ambassadorial wing, a fellow Star Wars fan, a good friend, and also a fellow ambassador, Mr. Ace Mowick. Ace,
hey,
good
how
to
you
see
guys
you, buddy.
doing?
Doing
Good to see
okay,
you too,
Ace. How
man.
you? So,
Hey, sorry to cut you off.
No,
I just got
you're
home
fine,
from
buddy.
vacation.
Oh, fun. Hope you went somewhere warm.
Yeah, we went to Orlando, but we had some on-off weather, so we got rained out. We kind of chilled by the pool, but nice to get away and relax. And today on the way back, I actually took a pit stop in Jacksonville for a con.
You geek. So,
Yeah, but guess who I met there?
Who?
Timothy Zahn.
I hate you.
I
hate you. I hate you. I hate you. I hate you.
He signed 6 of my books for free, and I got a picture with them.
I hate you even more.
But I went back and bought another book because I felt bad. Oh, you're not done hating me, because you know who I saw in his movie? I'll give you a fist bump.
Who?
Sam Witwer.
You're right. I hate you even more now. So.
Okay, I'm done.
Okay. Well, anyway, number one, Ace. Let me pose this question to you. What were some of your from what you might be able to recall? What were some of your favorite games from the 80s?
Well,
what were the ones that actually made your thumbs absolutely numb from punching that little button on the controller? So,
well, from the console I had from the 80s growing up was the original Nintendo Entertainment System, and I sadly was not alive yet in the 80s, but I grew up playing this throughout the 90s because we didn't get any other Nintendos. We didn't get a Super Nintendo or an N64. The next console we got was a PS1, but the games I remember playing the most out of was always Super Mario Bros. Castlevania for me. Like, it took me years to beat it.
That's a good one.
Mm-hmm.
Those are good ones.
I'm trying to think of some other ones. Some ones that were challenging, like Adventure, Blaster Master. And there were some not so great ones like Myland Secret Castle and Fester's Quest.
Mm-hmm. So, well, number one, what about you? What were some games from the 80s that you really spent hours on end smashing the little controller button and just wearing your poor thumbs to death on?
Well, yeah, for the Atari, I would say probably the ones that it mainly came with, which was Pong, believe it or not.
Was one of the very first. Yeah, go ahead, bud. Go ahead.
Yeah, which was basically the very first video game, if I recall correctly.
Yeah.
And stuff like Breakout, Asteroids, Pole Position. Obviously, Space Invaders was huge in the 80s. Let's see what else for Atari. Adventure, which was named already. That was a cool game. Obviously, everybody hated E.T., but
yes, one of the most derided and hated games ever created. E.T., where all you did was bounce up and down in a hole.
Yeah, but I did like the Superman game that they had for the Atari.
I didn't even know they had one.
Yeah, it was a pretty nifty game, actually.
Sounds familiar. Familiar.
I forget what it was called. It was probably called Superman something. I don't think it was just called Superman.
I think it was an AVGN review once.
Yeah. But and then for the Nintendo Entertainment System, obviously, Mario Brothers, the
Yeah.
original. Obviously Donkey Kong, which introduced Mario, but he wasn't called
Yes.
Mario in that game.
No, he was called Jumpman, just known as
Right.
Jumpman.
Yeah. And then, like Donkey Kong Jr., obviously. Pac-Man, played that to death.
Oh, yeah.
What else? Galaxian was big besides Space Invaders.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, there was so many.
Yeah.
So many. But yeah, those are the ones come to the top of my head, at least right at the moment.
Well, you know, speaking for myself, when my uncle and aunt gave me their old Atari, they had quite a collection of games as well. So, yes, actually, classic comics. Now that I was actually going to mention that Pitfall. Yeah, I remember that game
Pitfall
very well.
was by Activision. Yeah, that was
Yeah.
a great game. It took forever for me to finish that one.
Zaxxon. Yeah. And
Zaxxon was pretty cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you know, the really amazing thing was we didn't, you know, like I said, as a kid of the '80s, but didn't get into gaming until like the mid to late '80s, going into the '90s. That first Atari, that for me was like the linchpin of me getting into video gaming, honestly. And I loved it. I mean, yes, the graphics were very basic, obviously, for the time. That's what we had. We didn't have a PS4. We didn't have the PS5. We didn't have the Xbox One or anything like that. But there was something about, you know, and I remember this vividly, even now in 2022. There was even though the games were extremely basic, there was a lot of challenge to them. You had to have good you had to have good hand-eye coordination, and you know.
No, I like the cute kind of games.
Qbert.
Qbert was one. Dig Dug was another one.
Yes.
They were pretty cutish, and of course Miss Pac-Man.
Yeah.
It was I guess a cute kind of game too in a way. But the kind of just and they did have a game called for the PC called Jumpman. I remember playing that. And then what else did they have? They had Load Runner for a PC. That was like an early PC game that I played to death.
Well, it's it's funny that you would mention PC gaming, because honestly, personal computers, home computers were starting to become a thing. They were starting to get into the into homes, and because of the introduction of home computing, you also had the introduction of computer games. And I think one that a lot of people would remember is, of course, Oregon Trail. And nowadays, it's as small as I'll go on camera for this. This is actually something I found from Mam Ambassador, and she's like, "Hey, you're talking about this tonight or anything? You're talking about retro gaming. Why don't you, if you want this or anything?" Whereas it used to be on a floppy disk drive, it's now its own independent little thing. And the Oregon Trail. You can play it. You don't have to, and it even looks like an old school computer if you look at it real close. Because there's the floppy drive, there's the soundboard, and then there's all the keys. So, but that was, I think, one of the really great things about the games of the '80s is it became a challenge. And in particular, especially going into the latter part of the '80s, going into the '90s, the introduction of the arcade, where everybody became an arcade
arcades
god.
were around in the '80s.
Yeah,
even in the early '80s.
Yeah,
because
Well,
yeah.
Go ahead, number one.
Because I mean I remember going to arcades a lot in the early '80s, and yeah, it was mainly again to play, pretty much the games are already named and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, and then why am I forget? I can't forget Star Wars. Obviously.
Who can? That wireframe
It,
game? Yeah.
yeah,
We've
I
got the
mean that
wireframe
was
TIE fighters and the
The
wireframe
vector graphic one.
trench.
the vector graphic one.
Yeah.
The first original Star Wars.
Yeah, I
Probably
played that.
came out right at the beginning of the '80s, if I had to guess.
Yeah, where
No,
I
you're not
actually used to live. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Ace. No, go ahead, Ace. You're fine. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say that I played that vector graphics Star Wars arcade game at this bar in where I used to live in Toledo, Ohio. This place called I think it was Replay. I think is what it was called. It was a bar. It basically had arcade games rigged to play for free. The only condition was you had to either be eating something or drinking something, and all the games were free except for no cores. You just pressed a button, except for like pinball machines and Mario Kart. And it had that same vector graphic Star Wars game. I loved playing that thing, but after a while they swapped out for something else. I was mad. I had a good high score on there.
Well, that's the. Go ahead, number one.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of of Tron in a way. That movie had an arcade in
They had a
in
machine
there.
of that too.
And
Yep.
and he was playing, well, I guess the light cycle game, but it wasn't called that originally. They had different games where you had to avoid the lines and stuff. It was the snake game or whatever the heck it was called.
Not Centipede.
No, not Centipede. It was
Galaga?
No, not Galaga. It was similar. It was similar to you couldn't run into someone else's line type thing. That they still, I think, have you play it today. I forget. I could have swore it was just called Snake or something like that.
It might have been.
It'll come to you.
Well, I do want to bring up the classic comics coming up here. Depending on how you define arcade, arcades have been around. Were all the way around in the 70s. They were largely pinball games at that point, but they had video games too. Yeah, that classic. That's true. But with the kind of the explosion of development of different types of video games, at least 8-bit video games, video game arcades became very prolific and are very widespread. Let's just put it that way. In the 80s, and you all bring up a benchmark movie of the 80s, and it's one that I've covered on here and in the past, and that's of course Tron. You take a look at the beginning of that movie where they go over to Flynn's arcade, and that right there is truly a snapshot of the video arcade experience in the 80s, where everybody had their machine that they were like the kind of like the master of. They were like, and everybody else would be like, okay, let's see if I can knock the king off his mountain or the queen off of her mountain. And there was a very friendly rivalry. It wasn't hostile or anything, but everybody was trying to beat that high score, get that big high score and everything to be the next big dog on the block. And it was a very communal experience because we all talked the same jargon. We all played these games. We loved these games. We loved the experience. It's where we would gather to, hang out with our friends. It's where we would go on a Friday or a Saturday night and everything on the weekend. I mean, you wanted a cheap date. You go out for a slice, and then you take your date to the arcades, particularly if they were a gamer themselves. And granted, I wasn't old enough to have that sort of experience in the 80s and everything. I was a young kid at the time. But, growing up in the aftermath, especially in the 90s when video game arcades were still a big thing, and they still even had pinball machines. back then. And, we still love pinball machines nowadays. I mean, we even have video games of pinball machines, for heaven's sake. But, video gaming has always been something that we, as geeks and nerds, have always found commonality in. We always love discussing our favorite games. We always love talking about our favorite experiences. And, especially nowadays, retro gaming has become somewhat of an art form. It's something that people use as a means to express their artistic ability. I mean, you have 8-bit artwork, essentially. I mean, you've got screen prints on T-shirts of people's favorite video games from back in the day, and it's something that's really interesting, because we look back at the 1980s, not just for all of the really great movies and TV shows of that decade, but also we look at it because video gaming was really coming into its own in a lot of ways. I mean, it had started to grow legs in the mid to late 70s, but it really flourished and became more widespread and much more accessible to the everyday person, not just so much the geek or the nerd per se, but to everybody. I mean, you even look at another really cult classic movie of the 1980s, and that's, of course, War Games, which centers around a kid who accidentally breaks into NORAD and just wants to play video games. That's got to be one of the most absurd premises for a movie, but if you think about the context of the 1980s, it makes complete sense.
Yeah.
So, and classic comics here. There is a retro video game arcade near me called Free Play. Lots of 70s through 90s games. I go there every 3 to 4 weeks, although I haven't been since December. I'd be there now if not for all this homework. Classic, I do understand. And I understand the struggle, because I was there myself not too long ago. So,
sounds similar to the place I went to.
Well, and that's the other interesting thing, because in the last several years we've kind of seen a resurgence of retro gaming, and it has taken the form of these consoles, these reproduction consoles that can hold thousands of
games,
or well, at least let's say 20 or there's a lot more games than anything that we would ever consider. So
well, that's why I guess
go ahead.
Nintendo is coming out with their retro consoles for that has not as many as you can homebrew on there, but the main classic ones, I guess, and stuff like that.
There's even cartridges that compile a lot of games onto just one cartridge. I have one for my N64, but there's some for like the Super NES, Genesis, and the original NES. So you can pretty much get every whatever console game known to man, Japanese and American.
Right.
Called EverDrive, I think.
And shout out to the chat. Price is Right Reviews. Price, always good to see you, buddy. Appreciate you popping in tonight. And Fook Norris, how about Cloak and Dagger? Remember that one? Top secret info on a game cartridge. Actually, yeah, Fook, now that you mentioned that, I do remember that movie. Had Daphne Coleman in it. It's been a while since I've seen that game, actually, or seen that movie, actually. I'll have to go back and do a rewatch on it. And yeah, classic comics. Don't forget Dungeon Master. Yep. With Dirk the Knight, if I'm thinking of the right game.
I thought that was Dragon's Lair.
Yeah, it is Dragon Slayer. You're right. Thank you, number one. Appreciate it. Let's see. Prices. Galaga, Mappy. Mappy I'm not familiar with. Sonic
Yeah, it's a
and Gen
old.
X.
Yeah, that's an old game, Mappy. Just
I
like
don't remember.
I mean, yeah, Defender was definitely an '80s game.
Oh yeah, most definitely.
There was a bunch of space related ones.
Oh yeah.
Even Star Raiders for the Atari was probably cutting edge at the time.
Yeah. Well, that's looking back at gaming of the 80s and looking at what we have now, it all seems very basic. It all seems very simplistic. It seems a little bit, campy, but
Yeah, I
honestly,
remember
it laid the
when,
groundwork.
it did. It laid the groundwork for what we would have now. It inspired people who wanted to get into designing video games. And honestly, it's something that we
I
look back on.
remember when the original Wing Commander came out with Mark Hamill in it.
Yep. Yep.
And that was cutting edge at the time.
That was Sega CD, right?
I think so.
Well, they did make a movie out of Wing Commander, but with Freddie Prinze, I think, or something like that. I think it's Freddie Prinze Jr.
Yeah, you're thinking of the right movie, number one. Yeah, and I actually might do a review of that at some point. And
it's not the greatest movie. Don't get me wrong, but
it isn't. But it is. It's campy in all the right ways. So, and I want to say hello to the chat. Riot Kitty, Riot, is good to see you, my dear. Appreciate you popping in.
Is Last Starfighter, is that also an 80s movie?
That's 80s.
Yeah, that is most definitely 80s. I actually did, I think, a watch along for that back last year. I can't remember when exactly, but I know I did one. And that's definitely that's a whole 80s movie wrapped around a video game, essentially.
Yeah, exactly.
So, let's see. Crash Bandicoot, and folks, I do want to let y'all know, this is the first in a series of streams.
I think Sonic came out in the 80s, right?
No, it came out in the 90s.
Oh, okay. All right, my bad.
Sonic came out in the 90s. Do want to let you all know that this is just part one of a series of streams and videos I'm going to be doing on the evolution of gaming from the 80s going through to present day. So I will be doing a follow-up stream on this, anything on gaming of the 90s. Everything we'll be discussing that, and then be going into the current era. But I'm also going to be doing some videos, doing like my top 10s or whatever, top 10 favorite video games from the different decades. So just a little plug for that on the in terms of the channel. So and let's see, Classic Comics, Close and Dagger also starred Henry Thomas Elliott. Yeah, I couldn't remember who played the kid. So thank you, Classic. Appreciate it. So, and let's see, Riot Kitty. I guess maybe Pac-Man. Well, everybody played Pac-Man, Riot, so you're not alone there. So, and also to the chat, just George. George, it is good to see you, buddy. Hey everyone, only 80s game I played were the first two Zeldas that led me to my favorite gaming franchise. George, you cannot go wrong with Zelda. You really cannot.
So. Unless the battery in your cartridge dies.
Oh no. That was you died just a little bit. Let's see. And Price is Right. Let's see. You've got 3 comments here. I'll go through them real quick. I still remember playing Earthworm Jim. That was definitely in a 90s game. Crash Bandicoot. Crash Bandicoot was also a 90s game.
My man.
Was on the. That was no. You're fine, Ace. You're good, buddy. So, this is the real chill layback stream, buddy. So you're good. Crash Bandicoot is also my jam, though. No, actually, Price Tomb Raider was also a 90s game, not an 80s, because both Crash Bandicoot, I think Earthworm Jim, and Tomb Raider were all on the first generation PlayStation. But that will be That'll be something I'll be discussing when we get into gaming of the 90s, because if I remember correctly, the first PlayStation came out in I think like the late 90s. So
I think it was 95 or 96.
yeah, it was mid to the late 90s when the first PlayStation came out.
Yeah. And correct me
But
if I'm wrong, but I think
Mhm.
the original Tomb Raider was actually on the PC originally, and it was ported over to the PlayStation or something like that. I can't remember
That
which. I remember my
sounds right.
sister playing
Yeah,
it on the
sounds
PC,
right. Because
it might have been.
Yeah.
It might have been. Yeah. So, let's see. Fook Norris. Let me bring up your comment here, bud. My neighbor had a Commodore 64, which was pretty awesome to me and pushed me closer to PC gaming. Half the games were only text, but still fun as hell. Although almost like choose your own adventure stories. I actually remember those books, Fook, believe it or not. We had several of them at my school library when I was a kid. And, like I mentioned before, the first platform really that we had video gaming on of any kind was the PC, the home PC. And the Commodore 64, was very basic. It was very simplistic. You didn't have a whole lot of features. It didn't have a whole lot of computing power to it. But at the same time, it was the introduction of computing to the general public, because up until then, any type of computer technology was reserved for the private sector or for office work or anything like that. Once we got the Commodore 64 and like you mentioned, number one, the ColecoVision and so on, that's when video gaming, or at least computer gaming, got into homes. And you had games like I mentioned, Oregon Trail and so on, where it was primarily text based. There wasn't a whole lot of graphics to it,
yeah, that
but
was
it opened. Go ahead, number one.
yeah, that was like the Zork games, or just text adventures, and
Yeah.
and even Hitchhiker's Guide was a text adventure at the beginning.
Oh
And
wow! I
stuff
didn't
like
even know
that.
they did a game for Hitchhikers.
Yeah, they did a
Wow.
Hitchhiker's Guide to Galaxy. It was strictly a text adventure game,
Huh.
but the
And,
artwork for it is pretty amazing.
and now that you mentioned the Commodore 64, I believe I saw on like probably some episode of Angry Video Game Nerd from the last couple of years, actually did a retro release for the Commodore 64 compilation. Like, how there's those miniature consoles of like NES, Super NES, and whatnot.
Yeah.
They did one for the
Yeah.
Commodore 64 as well.
Really? Huh.
Yeah.
I'll be damned. I honestly, I was
something to look into.
I might have to, because I know they did some Star Trek games that were like primarily text based, or very the graphics were like dot matrix. And no, not the droid from Spaceballs, but dot matrix. Dot matrix.
I couldn't hold my oil.
So, and let's see what we got here. Fook Norris. I have had that, but it was famously unbeatable due to a bug. Oh, okay. All right. I see what you're saying. Hitchhiker's Guide. I mean, okay. And yeah, Price, another classic were the arcade 80s shooting games. Yeah, because you had like Duck Hunter. You had, I'm trying to think of some of the others. I mean, obviously, Asteroids was a shooting game. I mean, you had Galaga. You had, for heaven's sakes, I'm drawing a blank now. Space Invaders.
Yeah, Galaxian. Yeah.
Galaxia. Yeah. It was all a matter of timing your shots, having good reflexes. It wasn't so much about cheat codes or anything like that, or being able to have God mode where you couldn't be killed. You had to literally be better than the game. And
cheat codes aren't even a thing anymore.
Say again, Ace.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought my mic was off. I was just muttering to myself. I don't even think cheat codes are a thing anymore.
Pretty much no. I don't think so. No, I don't think they are. I think cheat codes have pretty much become a bygone thing because nowadays you can't find cheat codes. I don't think they even make cheat codes.
And I think originally cheat codes were just a way of, like, basically glitches that were kind of unintentionally programmed in, but they kind of couldn't remove for whatever reason. But I think since we've progressed so far with consoles and PCs, that obviously that they don't have that feature anymore. I think the last time I recall codes of any kind was the PS2 original Xbox era, maybe the PS3 if you can really think of something. I can't.
Definitely the Gen 1 Xbox for sure. Yeah, they had some cheat codes for those games, but I can't think of anything within the last 5 to 10 years, honestly, if not longer. So,
Same.
Let's see, classic comics. Any Gorf? I've never even heard of Gorf. To be honest with you, classic. Number one, Ace. Either one of you ever heard of that game, Gorf?
It's just a fancier Space Invaders, basically.
Okay.
It sounds like a hairy dwarf character you get as one of your crew in Dungeons and Dragons or a role playing game. I am Gorf.
Or it sounds. Let's see. Info walkthroughs are the cheat codes now. Luke, that's true. Yeah.
What do you say it was?
Info and walkthroughs are the cheat codes now.
Essentially, yeah.
Yep.
Trophy guides, or actually, the ultimate cheat code now: pay to win transactions.
Yes, you're not wrong there. Let's see what we got for me, Price. I played this 80's game. I forget the game, but it's Galaga style game, except you're in a plane bombing tanks over a forest and lakes. That does sound familiar. But I can't think of the name of the game. Number one, Ace, does that sound familiar to either one of you?
What was the description of it?
I've got it up here.
It's a little hard for me to read. I'm reading this off my phone. And
okay,
if I get cut off from the stream, it's probably because my battery will die, just forewarning you.
Okay, that's fine.
Sounds kind of like River Raid or something like that.
Okay.
Oh, wait, was it 1943?
It could be that too.
Possibly. I mean, I think I've heard of that game like in passing, but
yeah, I know the style. It was kind of cloned by a bunch of different games, and the one I think of is 1943.
You might be right. Well, one other aspect of where did they advertise all these games? Comic books. And they always had the best artwork for these games, even though the games themselves were so freaking basic. But we look at the artwork for these games now, and we almost consider it like pieces of art per se. The cartridge art, the box art, even is actually really cool. I mean.
Yeah, it's probably 1942, actually. That's the name of the game.
Okay. Oh, 42? I thought it was 43.
Yeah, it's called 1942.
Okay, I might be thinking the movie.
You're thinking 1941.
That's 1941.
Oh, one. What am I thinking 3 for? I must be partially dyslexic.
It's all right. Price says no, it starts with an X. Okay, well, Price, you're going to have to...
X is probably XAVIUS or something like that.
Maybe.
XAVIUS is the only one that I know of that starts with X.
And actually, Ambassador, when you mentioned how some of the games were advertised in comics, that is true. But actually, when I saw a podcast recently on cartoonist kayfabers on YouTube, and I highly recommend it to anyone who's a fan of just comics art in general, or learning about the medium. But anyway, they had... Joe Quesada, who is once a writer artist, and also former editor-in-chief at Marvel Comics. And he was telling his story about how when he got started in the business, actually one of his earliest jobs was actually in a sales department trying to, sell NESs. And he was giving this great story about how difficult it was in those early days to try and pitch them, to people to sell in a department store because, the video game crash had ended, Atari went under, and, trying to sell a new console no one ever even heard of from Japan. It was a very great story.
I can imagine, because Atari was the king for the longest time there in the 80s, and then Nintendo came along and just kind of stole its thunder, and then it's just
the weird thing is that
Mhm.
the weird thing is one game from the 80s is still around today, and it's pretty much original form, and that's Tetris.
Yeah.
Oh, so addicting.
Jeez, especially that soundtrack. I mean, I remember, and I can't remember if this was an 80s or 90s thing, but the Game Boy. I think the Game Boy was started out in the 90s. Yeah. Okay. Well, we'll get to that next time. So, but honestly, Tetris. I remember playing that for hours. I mean, hours on my Game Boy, and I got so good that I started shooting the rockets. You clear a level, and I think I got to level. I think I got to level 99 or something, and I was clearing the board, and I was. You ask me to do that now, I don't think I could. But back then, I was a Tetris god. So, but as I was saying before, the whole concept of video gaming and that rivalry that existed amongst gamers, it was always very civil. And I think that's something that we why we look back on gaming of the 80s and the 90s and so on so fondly, is because it reminds us of a time when the world was just a little more civil, and where we didn't care about people's social positions or political positions or anything else. All we cared about was talking about these games that we love, and competing against one another. And it was always friendly competition. It was never hostile or adversarial or anything. And it was just, I think for all of us here, it reminds us of a simpler time. And that's why I wanted to, besides being an ardent gamer myself, for almost 30 years now or more, 3 decades.
Mm-hmm.
It's been a major part of my life. It's been a means of escape and everything. I remember when I was younger, especially when I started working in my late teens, I'd get home from work and I just would have had maybe I had a crappy day, or maybe I was just really tired. I'd change clothes, get myself a drink, pop down in front of the TV, hook up my console, and just release some tension, release some stress. And it's something that I do even now in my 40s. And games like Space Invaders and Pac-Man and Adventure and all these others that we've listed, they were, for a lot of us, they were a means by which we relieve stress. And it's very visceral, it's very cathartic, because when you beat that last alien or whatever, you get that endorphin rush.
Nowadays, it's just mama jokes on in shooting games and all sorts of other vulgar crap.
Yeah. Well, it's part of the evolution of gaming. I mean, we can't. It's just a simple, and that's the funny thing, and we'll come to that, but we can discuss it briefly here. we've gone from where we're in a physical space, we're in an arcade, whether it's in a mall or stand or a um an arcade just in its own individual structure, or at a movie theater. That's the one thing I miss about movie theaters is they don't have arcades anymore. But something that I have seen, I'm very happy to see, is you started to see a return of the mall-based arcade. And I, as somebody who grew up in the 90s and the early 2000s going to mall arcades, I'm very happy to see it. Now, granted, the games are a lot more advanced in some ways, but at the same time, it gives you that nostalgic feeling. And yeah, we would trash talk one another, but you know what? It was always civil. It was never mean spirited per se.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, ooh, that's price, and I'll definitely when we get into the next decade, that'll be the 90s. That'll definitely be one that I'll cover for sure is the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and particularly the multiplayer arcade machines. Those were a lot of fun because you had the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles one, you had the X-Men one. There were a few others I recall. So, but it's just. As crazy as everything is in the world right now, it's nice to just kind of take a breath, slow down for a little bit, and reflect on something good that we all really enjoy. It's something that was part of our childhoods or part of our teenage years or whatever the case. And it's, like I just said, it's kind of cathartic. It gives you a release in a good way. And let's see. Okay, all right. Price found the name of that game. It was called XAVIUS. I think I'm pronouncing it correctly.
The one you compared to Galaga and Space Invader.
Yeah, with the tanks and
XAVIUS.
airplanes. XAVIUS.
Okay. XAVIUS, yeah, that's how I pronounce it.
Okay. Well, speaking for myself, the games I spent the most time playing on my old Atari that I had as a kid. Obviously, I played Pac-Man. Got pretty good at it. Obviously, Empire Strikes Back for the Atari, where that was called it was Camels versus Pigeons. That's what it was referred to as back in the day. Well, because essentially the AT-ATs look like camels and the snow spears look like pigeons, essentially. Oh Lord, let's see. Obviously, played Asteroids. You had Missile Command, which is you can see John Connor playing in Terminator 2: Judgment Day. Nice little callback and everything to a great game of those years. Let's see, price. Wasn't Star Wars Jedi Knight an 80's PC game? No, price. That didn't come out until like the 90s or the 2000s. So
97, I believe.
Yeah.
I
price.
had that game.
Yeah, a lot of the games that you're referencing, we didn't have the systems at the time didn't have the computing power for the graphics. The graphics back in the 80s were really super simplistic. I mean, really, really super simplistic. It was 8-bit and everything, and that was it. We didn't get into like 16 or 32-bit or 24-bit until like the 90s. And then, of course, and like I said, we'll discuss this next time. One of the add-on additions for the Sega Genesis, which was my first outright Um, brand new system and everything was the Sega 32X, which you had the two games I had for that was Doom and it was a Star Wars game. It was a simulator, a flight simulator game. So okay, yeah, and prices.
X-Wing?
I it might have been, yeah, it might have been X-wing. So, but like I said, we'll save that for when we get into the gaming of the '90s discussion. So,
Yeah.
But anyway, guys, I'm not gonna. This isn't gonna be super long, so we'll go for a few more minutes. So I'm gonna let you guys. Uh, oh, Price! How could I have forgotten that? Uh, Mario Brothers,
Oh,
just regular Mario Brothers. Jeez, how could I have forgotten that one? Because that is one of the big games of the '80s. I mean, granted, it was just known as Mario Brothers, and it was actually, I think, no, that handheld gaming didn't start becoming more commonplace until the '90s. So never mind, scratch that. So, but I'm gonna let you guys give any closing thoughts that you have, and then we'll probably wrap up for the night. So, floor is yours, guys.
I'm trying to think of something. Like I said, I was mainly a kid in the '90s, but so I only had a limited access to stuff from the '80s. But yeah, it's interesting how much within probably since the mid 2000s there was such a renaissance of interest in not just the actual games themselves, but the style of gaming. Like you said, people going for that 8-bit, 16-bit era type of graphics that they even use now with indie games, or use it as a basis at least for the overhead of, like, say, Legend of Zelda or the side scrolling of Contra.
Yeah, that's very true. And honestly, the '80s was primarily a side-scrolling landscape because um, that's what we were capable of doing. Is you just had a static background, or you had a background that just kind of recycled itself, and then you would have randomized images moving in front of it, essentially. And you think of a game like Pitfall, that's very much it has a very static background, but you would have randomized obstacles. You'd obviously have the pit that you would fall into if you didn't make that jump. And like I was saying before, a lot of people nowadays are very, they look, here's one thing and everything that I've seen within the last few years. We've had the big explosion in interest of the Funko Pop, and they've even created 8-bit versions of Funko Pops that look like different characters from games and so on. And I've seen Funko Pops that are 8-bit of the Xenomorph from Aliens. I've seen Funko Pops of different characters from movies. Like, I think I've even seen some Funko Pops that were 8-bit digitized versions of Marvel characters, for heaven's sake. So,
yeah, I never really I'm sorry, not to get too off track. I was just saying I never really got too into the appeal of Funko Pops. I'm not knocking them. I just kind of scratch my head just because I just think they're bobbleheads that don't bobble. I mean, I own one myself and I put it in my car, Dark Knight Returns of Batman, and I've bought a few others, but just as gifts for friends, except for 2 Power Rangers ones for the sole purpose of getting signed.
Mm-hmm. And I get that. Me and the missus, we collect. I think collectively we have a rather substantial Funko Pop collection, ranging from Marvel to Star Wars, Once Upon a Time, to some other more randomized stuff and everything. The Once Upon a Time ones are the misses and everything, and I do not say that to chide her or kid her or anything, because I like that series. Once Upon a Time, it was a really good show.
I only saw a few episodes at the gym.
Okay.
Out of curiosity, has you ever seen another show with a similar premise called The 10th Kingdom? It's like from the early 2000s.
I'd have to ask her. I don't know.
Yeah. If she says no, tell her to check it out. She might like it.
Okay, I will.
Yeah,
So
it's a series, so it's like a mini series. It's not multiple
I've heard of
seasons,
it.
it's just one season.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
I've heard of
recommend
it.
it. It's good.
But I never had a chance to watch it. But I have heard of it. So, and yeah, Price is Right. Frogger. I even had Frogger in the thumbnail for tonight. So, yeah, that little toad and everything. If he weren't careful, he became roadkill, essentially. So, but yeah, I think just to give my last couple of comments here. I will always look fondly back on the 1980s. It was the decade. It was one of the decades of my childhood, and I know there was a lot of crappy stuff going on in the real world of the 80s. But in terms of from the perspective of a kid, there was a lot of cool stuff going on too. And in spite of all the crappy stuff that was going on back then, gaming was, for me, an introduction to a pastime that has been part of my life since then. And to see how gaming has evolved from the 8-bit character and the very simplistic gameplay to something that's much more evolved and a lot more cerebral, it's really amazing to see. And I look forward to this series and everything as we continue through it. So, number one, Ace, I appreciate you guys joining me tonight. I haven't decided when I'll do the 90s gaming discussion, but obviously I will put out notifications on social media once I decide on that. Like I said, got some real life stuff to get through first and everything, but I want to thank you both, and I want to thank everybody that was in the chat tonight. I appreciate you all tuning in, and for those of you that'll catch us on the replay, leave down in the comments. Leave your tell us what you thought. What were your experiences of gaming in the 1980s, and some of your favorite games, some of your favorite consoles, your experiences.
Yeah, there's a
with all
bunch
that
that
stuff.
we still didn't
Yeah.
mention, like the original Legend of
Mhm.
Zelda was in the 80s.
Yeah. Was it?
And Punch Out was in the 80s.
Oh, that's right. Was
Hmm.
it? Yeah.
The original Metal Gears were in the 80s.
Yeah. Yeah,
Oh,
there's
that's
a
right.
bunch of original stuff in the 80s. Burger Time was kind of big then.
Well, maybe what I'll do is when I've got my head a little more squared away, we'll do a part 2 on gaming of the 80s, and then we'll go into the 90s because,
Yeah.
like I said, guys, I didn't want to cancel this or postpone this, but
Yeah. And
my
you had
head's
Joust was big too.
yeah. So, but we'll do a follow up on gaming of the 80s, everything here in maybe a week or so. But we're going to go ahead and wrap up for tonight, guys. And like I said, I appreciate y'all tuning in for tonight. Number one, Ace, I do appreciate y'all joining me. So
Thanks for having us.
hey,
Yep,
anytime,
thank you.
guys. So anyways, folks, that's going to be it for tonight. We will see you next time. Y'all have a great weekend. And until next time, these are the ambassadors signing off.
Peace.